So, you want to get your ashes shot into space. Not metaphorically, literally. You want a rocket, a countdown, and a small metal capsule containing what's left of you launched off the surface of the Earth and aimed at the stars. Here's the first number you need to know. A traditional American funeral with a casket, a viewing, and a burial costs a median of about $8,300. The cheapest space burial on the market right now costs $3,495. Less than half. That's not a typo. It is genuinely cheaper to send your ashes into space than it is to be put in the ground. And here's the second number. A cremation in America leaves between 5 and 8 pounds of ash. The amount a space burial company actually sends up is between 1 and 7 grams. That's not a handful, that's a pinch. A symbolic portion, as the industry describes it. So right away you have to understand what you are buying. You are not buying a burial. You are buying a gesture. A very small amount of you, or of someone you loved, placed inside a capsule the size of a lipstick tube, bolted to the side of someone else's rocket, and launched as a secondary payload on a mission that was going up anyway. The fuel isn't burned for your funeral. The rocket isn't yours. You're a paying guest on a flight that would have left without you. And more than 1,000 people have paid for it. The question is whether what they got was worth it. Let's start with the only company that matters. Celestis, based in Houston, Texas, has been doing this since 1994. As of mid-2025, they had completed 24 memorial spaceflights. They are the dominant player, the longest-running operator, and the company responsible for nearly every famous space burial you've ever heard of. Their first flight launched on the 21st of April, 1997, from the Canary Islands. On board, in tiny capsules, were the cremated remains of 24 people. 2 of them you know. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, and Timothy Leary, the psychologist, the counterculture icon, the man who told an entire generation to turn on, tune in, drop out. Both of them left Earth together on a Pegasus rocket, and both of them burned up on re-entry a few years later. That flight cost $4,800 per person. 7 grams of ash, a ride into orbit, a few trips around the planet, and then a streak of light across the atmosphere. Gone. That was the product, and it worked, because the product was never really the rocket. The product was the story. Roddenberry, the man who invented a universe built on the idea of exploring space, actually going there. Leary, the man who spent his entire life trying to expand human consciousness, expanding it one final time. Those are not funerals. Those are endings so good that people tell them to strangers. And Celestis understood this immediately. Every famous space burial since then has been a marketing event disguised as a memorial. James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty on the original Star Trek, requested that his ashes be sent to space. Celestis arranged it. The first attempt, in 2008, failed when the rocket didn't reach orbit. They tried again, and in 2012, a portion of Doohan's remains launched successfully on a SpaceX Falcon 9. The company's guarantee is that if a launch fails, they fly you again, at no additional cost. Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura on the same show, was booked on a later flight, and the one that matters most for understanding what this business actually is. In 1998, NASA's Lunar Prospector mission carried a capsule to the surface of the Moon containing the ashes of Eugene Shoemaker, the planetary scientist who co-discovered the comet that hit Jupiter. Shoemaker had always wanted to be an astronaut. He never qualified, so after his death, a former student arranged for his remains to ride along on a mission to the Moon. He is, as far as anyone knows, the only human being whose remains are confirmed to rest on the lunar surface. That one wasn't even a Celestis mission. It was a NASA favor. But it set the template for everything Celestis would later sell, which is this: your loved one goes where the astronauts go. And for a certain kind of person, that sentence is worth more than any headstone. Now let's price out the menu. Celestis offers 4 tiers. Think of it like a hotel. Same building, different floors, very different views. Tier 1, Earthrise, $3,495. Your capsule launches to the edge of space on a suborbital flight, experiences a few minutes of zero gravity, and comes back down. You get the capsule returned to you as a keepsake. This is the cheapest option, and the one Celestis compares directly to a traditional funeral. Your ashes go up and come home. Tier 2. Earth Orbit. $4,995. Your capsule enters low Earth orbit and stays there, circling the planet for months or years until the orbit decays and the capsule re-enters the atmosphere. It burns up. Your family can track it online while it's up there, watching it pass overhead. Tier 3. Luna. $12,995. Your capsule rides to the surface of the moon. It stays there, permanently. This is the tier the Navajo Nation tried to stop, but more on that in a minute. Tier 4. Voyager. Also $12,995. Deep space. Your capsule leaves the Earth-Moon system entirely and enters a permanent orbit around the Sun. It will never come back. It will never burn up. It will, in theory, orbit for millions of years. And they recently announced a fifth, Mars. $24,995. A mission to place human remains in orbit around Mars, scheduled no earlier than 2030. The only launch vehicle currently capable of carrying it is SpaceX's Starship. There is a $245 processing fee on top of every tier. And these are per-person prices. A couple who wants to orbit together pays double. But before you pick a tier, you need to understand what you are actually paying for. Because the rocket is the least interesting part of this transaction. When a family books a Celestis flight, the company hosts what it calls a 3-day life celebration at the launch site, Cape Canaveral, Spaceport America in New Mexico. The families come. There's a tour of the launch facilities. There's a dinner, sometimes with a real astronaut as a speaker. There's a memorial service the day before launch where every family shares the story of the person they're sending up. And then there's the launch itself, watched from a viewing area, often webcast to friends and family who couldn't travel. This is the actual product. Not the rocket, not the capsule. The experience. The 3 days of ceremony, the shared grief, the countdown, the liftoff. The moment when a room full of mourning strangers watches a column of fire carry their people off the surface of the earth and cheers. A headstone gives you a place to visit. Celestis gives you a day you will never forget. That's a real value proposition, and it is very difficult to argue with a family who chose it and felt it was worth every cent. Now let's talk about the part nobody puts in the brochure. On the 8th of January 2024, United Launch Alliance's brand new Vulcan Centaur rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral carrying Astrobotic's Peregrine lunar lander. On board were payloads from 2 memorial spaceflight companies, Celestis, with 66 capsules containing cremated remains and DNA bound for the moon on its Tranquility flight, and Elysium Space, a smaller competitor with its own lunar payload. The rocket worked fine. The lander did not. Peregrine developed a propulsion failure shortly after separation. It never reached the moon. It drifted back toward Earth and burned up in the atmosphere, taking every memorial capsule with it. 66 families had paid to put their loved ones on the moon. Their loved ones burned up over the Pacific instead. Celestis's response was to offer those families a spot on the next lunar mission. More than half re-enrolled. The CEO pointed out, correctly, that space is hard, that all clients are informed of the risk in advance, and that the company guarantees a reflight. But here's what that incident actually tells you about this business. You are buying a ticket on someone else's rocket, to ride someone else's lander, built by a company you've never heard of, launching on a vehicle that may be flying for the first time. Celestis does not build rockets. Celestis does not build landers. Celestis builds capsules, books payload space, and hosts memorial events. The flight itself is entirely outside their control. Every launch date on their website comes with the same caveat. Subject to change based on technical readiness, mission priorities, regulatory requirements, and other factors outside our direct control. You are paying for a promise that depends on an industry where things blow up on a regular basis. And that's the good scenario. The bad scenario happened to Elysium Space, the other company on that same failed flight. In 2015, Elysium had payload on a military rocket called Super Stripey that failed shortly after launch. Their client's remains never reached orbit. The company promised a reflight. But Elysium is not Celestis. It's smaller, newer, less capitalized. If a small space burial company folds between your booking and your launch, your deposit goes with it. There is currently no insurance product, no escrow requirement, and no federal regulation specific to memorial spaceflight. You are trusting a private company to stay solvent long enough to put your grandmother on a rocket, and the only guarantee is their word. Now let's talk about who didn't want any of this to happen. In December 2023, the president of the Navajo Nation, Peregrine, sent a letter to NASA and the U.S. Department of Transportation. The letter said, "The moon holds a sacred position in many indigenous cultures. The act of depositing human remains on the moon is tantamount to desecration of this sacred space." He asked NASA to delay the Peregrine launch until the Navajo Nation's concerns were addressed. NASA's response, delivered at a press briefing, was essentially that the mission was commercial, and they had no framework for telling a private company what it can and can't fly. Celestis' CEO was more direct. He told reporters that no one and no religion owns the moon. He said there should not be a religious test for space missions. The launch went ahead. The Navajo Nation was not consulted further. And then the lander failed and burned up before reaching the moon. And a spokesman for the Navajo Nation told reporters the nation was relieved. This is not a resolved issue. Celestis has another lunar mission planned. The Navajo Nation has not changed its position. And there is currently no law, no treaty, and no international framework that addresses who gets to decide what can be left on the surface of the moon. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 says no nation can claim sovereignty over a celestial body. It says nothing about a company from Houston leaving 66 capsules of human ash on one. If the lunar missions continue, this will become one of the defining ethical questions of the commercial space age. And the families who paid $12,995 for a moon burial are standing directly in the middle of it. Let's run the final math. Option 1. You choose the Earthrise suborbital flight. $3,495 plus fees. Your ashes go up, come back, you get a keepsake capsule. Total cost, including a direct cremation beforehand, is somewhere in the range of $5,000 to $6,000. That's cheaper than the median American funeral with burial. Genuinely. For the price of a casket and a plot, you got a rocket launch, a 3-day ceremony at Cape Canaveral, and a capsule that's been to the edge of space sitting on your family's shelf. That is, for a certain kind of person, the single best deal in the entire American death industry. Option 2. You choose Earth orbit. About $5,000 plus cremation. Your remains circle the planet for a while, your family tracks you online. Eventually, you burn up in the atmosphere and become, for one brief second, a streak of light in somebody's sky. Astronomically, you become a shooting star, literally. And then you're gone. Option 3. The moon. $13,000 plus cremation and travel. Your remains sit on the lunar surface, theoretically forever, but only if the lander works. Only if the rocket works, and only if no future international treaty or agreement decides that leaving human remains on celestial bodies is not permitted. You are buying permanence from an industry that cannot yet reliably deliver a lander to the surface it's aiming at. Option 4. Deep space or Mars. $13,000 to $25,000. Your remains leave the Earth-Moon system. They orbit the Sun, or eventually Mars. You will travel farther from home than any human being who has ever lived. You will also be 1 gram of powder in a capsule the size of a tube of lipstick, bolted to the side of a spacecraft, on a mission you were never the point of, sailing through a void so large that the word silence doesn't begin to describe it. Nobody will visit you. Nobody will find you. Nobody will ever know you're there unless someone on Earth tells the story. And that brings us back to where we started. The average American funeral costs about $8,000. What it buys is a place, a headstone with a name on it, in a cemetery that someone will maintain, that your grandchildren can find on a map. It's ordinary, it's forgettable, and it works because the point was never to be remembered by strangers. The point was to be findable by the people who loved you. A space burial costs about the same, and it buys the opposite. Not a place, but an absence. Not a location, but a trajectory. Not something your family can visit, but something they can only point at. Gene Roddenberry burned up on re-entry. James Doohan's ashes were once smuggled onto the International Space Station by a private citizen who hid the capsule in a laminated card, and nobody at NASA noticed for years. Eugene Shoemaker is on the moon, and nobody alive can visit him. These are extraordinary stories. They are also, in every case, stories about people who are nowhere. Whether that's beautiful or empty depends entirely on who's being asked. The families of Celestis clients, by all accounts, overwhelmingly say it was worth it. They describe the launch as one of the most powerful experiences of their lives. They describe tracking the satellite overhead and feeling, for the first time since the death, something other than grief. But the industry selling this experience is young, unregulated, dependent on rockets it doesn't own, facing an unresolved conflict with indigenous nations whose sacred spaces it intends to use, and offering a product that, by its own admission, fails often enough to require a standing reflight guarantee. The question was, what does it cost to get your ashes shot into space? The answer is $3,495, and all the certainty you'd normally expect from a funeral.